Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. And the big story, at least among us Catholics this week, was the declaration from Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone in San Francisco that barred Nancy Pelosi from receiving the Eucharist in that archdiocese. And here to talk about the politics of this, both here and at the Vatican, is a friend of mine, Francis Rocca from the Wall Street Journal, one of the best, if not the best, Vaticanista that there is out there. You can follow him at Francis X Rocca that's ROCCA on Twitter, and you should already be subscribing to the Wall Street Journal, as I do, in order to, in large part, to catch up with his reporting on the Vatican, which is hard to get in the U.S. anywhere else. Frank, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Ed. Always glad to be here. Thank you very much.
It's been an interesting few days since this news dropped, not just because of the controversy that got stirred up by this, which, this is not new. We've been having this debate really for a generation as to what the response should be to Catholic politicians who support abortion, especially in terms of how they support it. I think what's more interesting right now is sort of the lack of reaction in some quarters. And I gotta be honest with you, I was thinking that this was going to be that there was going to be a stronger reaction to this from other parts of the Catholic Church. Are you surprised that it's been relatively quiet here and there?
Well, no, actually, not really, because I think that, first of all, they thrashed this out with regard to Biden, who's after all the president. And the bishops last fall, as you remember, backed away from a collective statement that would have, in some way said, if politicians defy or dissent from church teaching on abortion, they might be denied communion or something. They didn't even address the issue explicitly because it was pretty clear that the Pope and the Vatican didn't want them to. And I think that, and that came on the heels of a very friendly meeting between the Pope and President Biden at the White House. And now the Pope didn't say at any point, explicitly, Biden says the Pope told him you could keep taking communion. Now, the Vatican never commented that officially, and as far as we know, never leaked anything sort of trying to say that wasn't true. So that too, I think if you put all that together, it kind of undercuts in the minds of many. I'm not saying this is not a legal judgment or a moral judgment, but in terms of its impact politically, kind of undercuts the action by the Archbishop. For many, I think. So they probably think, well, okay, she's just going to keep taking communion just as President Biden does.
Well, I think so. And there were reports that, you could, I forget who it was that said it. And I think that maybe this is not a great way to approach your standing to receive the Eucharist, I think it was probably very accurate that all it really takes is a good advanced person to check out the churches in the area to figure out which one has a pastor that will be more sympathetic to Nancy Pelosi. And reportedly she took communion over the weekend. I mean, honestly, the issue here is more, I think, about... I think it's more specific to Nancy Pelosi, right? Because Joe Biden is a different situation in a couple different ways. One is he's the president, and as president, he's also head of state as well as head of government in the United States. And the Vatican has to maintain good relations with heads of state, even when they're doing contradictory things, as we're seeing very clearly with Russia and Ukraine. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. That's not necessarily the case with Nancy Pelosi, but I think she's a different case in another way. You have Catholic politicians who try to explain support for abortion as trying to detach their religion from their politics. Nancy Pelosi, I think, is maybe one of the few, if not the only Catholic politician of stature who tries to argue that Catholicism teaches her to support abortion. She's made this claim a number of times, and Archbishop Cordileone has tried several times to correct that. This may make her just a category of her own in this issue.
Yeah, although didn't Biden recently say something about quickening and Thomas Aquinas, and he made this was the other day. I think it was shortly after the leaked message. So he was sort of arguing that, oh well, maybe the theologians differ about this. That was the suggestion, I think. Yep. But also with regard to, you're right that the head of state is the head of state, and so the Pope is obviously not going to not meet with somebody. But a few weeks before he met with President Biden last fall, he met with Pelosi too, and it was a very friendly meeting with photos in the Vatican, in the Pope's private library, which I remember when Benedict was Pope. There was at least one occasion Nancy Pelosi came and she attended, I think, a general audience, and then she met privately with him briefly afterwards, and there were no photos. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, now, again, that doesn't amount to the Pope saying, I bless you, but in terms of political impact, it's certainly a very friendly sign, and the people in the Vatican know who she is and what's going on. So, I think that, but I think that probably undercuts. If you're talking about how seriously Catholics should take this, that's another matter. I'm not disputing that, but I can see why it might undercut it politically.
No, I see that too, and I think it's a really good point to raise. I did like, I can't think of his name now. J.D. Flynn's comment about this. I was on the day that this got released, and basically saying that the big takeaway from this should be every Catholic should really be thinking about their fitness to receive the Eucharist, because the bishops take it seriously, and so should the rest of us. And which I thought was a very good take on this, and this is an instructive moment, I think, for all of us. I think it's also important to remember too that this is not excommunication. This is simply she can access all the other sacraments. She's certainly welcome to come to Mass. She's just not supposed to present herself to, for communion, which makes this more of a, it's not a penal penalty, in other words. It's more of an administrative move meant to, I think, really get her back into dialogue with her bishop.
Yeah, and I guess apparently the bishop, where she has a country house or a winery, right, in Napa Valley.
In Napa Valley, yeah.
Pardon me?
Yeah, in Napa Valley, which is really nice.
Yeah. That bishop said he would respect Archbishop Cordileone's decision, but I would be very surprised if Cardinal Gregory in Washington would do that. And she goes obviously to church regularly in Washington. I think, again, the message is that people will take from this, unless they have strong feelings about it already, the bishops disagree,
right.
And so, I don't know. I don't want to be blasé about it. I just think, in Archbishop Cordileone's letter, he had to go and quote a letter from then Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, saying, yes, that this kind of thing is appropriate in such cases. But that letter was never published. And last year, the successor to Cardinal Ratzinger at the head of the doctrinal office told the U.S. bishops that letter wasn't meant to be public. It's not public, and it's not the primary document that you should be using for this. So you can, over and over again, you can see the distance between the Vatican, this pontificate, and those bishops who want to be very strong on this. And so this is a little bit of a constant theme in this pontificate, especially with the U.S. and especially with conservative bishops. And I think Cordileone is particularly vocal and strong on this. I think a lot of bishops probably are inclined his way, but in the end, I don't think they were going to oppose the Vatican.
No, and I think it's interesting too that the Vatican has been low key about this. I mean, I did see that, but what you're not seeing is, a really public. I guess we're talking about scale here. It seems like they are satisfied to allow this to be dealt with among the American bishops, which is also a theme of this pontificate. They're very they're interested in synodality. They kind of want to boost the the conferences in dealing with these issues. And I think that some Catholics might be wondering if there's an issue here that might be a bigger problem down the road, which is, as you mentioned, sort of a lack of unity, maybe even just sort of a lack of direction here, that just leads to more ambiguity.
Well, yeah, I mean, the bishop, the bishop, every bishop has this authority, and
Right.
and that's in canon law, and I don't think the Pope is challenging that. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to assume he doesn't agree with this move personally, because he's never done anything like this himself, and so, and he did everything to discourage a kind of national policy or anything that could resemble that. But the bishop has this authority. I should say, I mean, this is although there's a different tone and mindset on this matter in this pontificate than there was under Benedict. That's certainly true. It's also true that even if you talk to very, very conservative people in the Vatican, who are, very much condemn abortion, who think it's a high priority, who they don't understand the United States. It's very, very peculiar to them because, of course, this doesn't happen in Europe. It doesn't happen in Italy. Pro-choice politicians received communion from Pope Benedict and from Pope John Paul, in the Italians, and probably no doubt others that I'm not thinking of from other European countries. It's just not an issue in the way that it is in the States. So I think that's a disconnect that even goes beyond this particular Pope.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
The only explanation that I can find for that is that, the way as we've talked about, I think you and I before, in the European countries, the abortion policy was resolved more or less democratically, and so there was a political settlement, and people more or less agreed, even though no one maybe was totally happy. Whereas in the U.S., we've had 50 years of this situation with Roe versus Wade, where it wasn't allowed to shake out that way politically, and so you have a policy that the church would consider very extreme. The church considers extreme. I mean, basically very few limitations on abortion, and so the U.S. bishops are more exercised about it. That's the only explanation I can find.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, actually, and it's something that I've talked about. If we don't know how the Dobbs case is going to shake out. We had the leaked draft from Samuel Alito. We don't even know if that's actually going to be the final opinion, if it's going to be it might end up being a dissent. You never know how these things are going to shake out until they actually publish the decision and the opinions. But assuming that it shakes out that way, I think that, and I've been saying this all along, is that what it's going to do is kind of going to expose both parties on this as largely unrepresentative of the actual American electorate, which I think would probably end up producing through state legislatures and all that. It's something that looks a lot like what's gone on in Europe, right? Which is, sort of this idea that we're going to have to put up with abortion to some extent, but we're going to have a lot of limitations on it, and people need to be reasonable about it. That, I think, will take some of the pressure off the bishops, but of course we're not there yet.
Yeah, no, certainly not. I guess the one question about Cordileone matter, and this is that, will other bishops follow suit? Maybe not necessarily only with the most famous figures like Pelosi and Biden, but with other, it's happened in the past. There have been individual bishops who have either privately or publicly said that certain politicians shouldn't receive communion because of this matter. But maybe more of them will start doing it. Maybe Archbishop Cordileone is a leading figure. He's very prominent. He's taken on a very, very important person. So, will a bishop in some city where the congressman is a Catholic who supports abortion rights, maybe he'll say, well, all right, I'm going to take my lead from Cordileone. That would be interesting. I don't know how much effect it will have politically. I don't know what you think. I don't know if anybody would be swayed. Sorry.
No. I'm sorry. I stepped on you just a little bit there, but I'm not really sure. I don't really know how this shakes out politically. And of course, you've got Cordileone, who's insisting that this isn't political, it's pastoral. He was on EWTN last night making the argument as well. And but I mean, it's anything involving a politician is going to be political, whether or not you intend it that way. And I'm not sure that this is really going to break out of the paradigms, even at the parish level. I mean, I've been Catholic for a very long time. I've been a member of several different parishes, and I think the most remarkable aspect of parish life is really how politically what's the word I'm looking for? Diverse Catholic parishes are. You have very liberal people sitting next to very conservative people, and all the flavors in between. And I think that we're kind of used to this, right? I mean, what's your sense on that?
Well, I mean, I don't have the latest numbers, but I mean, they always say that, self-identified Catholics is one thing, and then, mass attending Catholics are another.
True.
So it's sort of like between, registered or eligible, all potential voters and maybe registered voters, something like that. But the people who actually go to mass frequently tend to oppose abortion by a significant margin, although it's not 100%, but it's more than half. I mean, certainly. Whereas the self-identified Catholics just mirror the U.S. population as a whole, I think, on these points. But but again, though, with the fact that the bishop, I mean, in other words, if you're a Catholic in the pew or not, and you vote for a congressman or don't, because of the abortion issue, does it make any difference to you that the bishop then said that person can't take communion? Probably not, because I mean, if you don't care about the issue, then so anyway. But I understand the point is not. I mean, the point is not to try to shift that. Certainly in San Francisco, I don't think that Archbishop Cordileone thinks that his doing this is going to cause Nancy Pelosi to lose her seat. But I think, but I mean, I mean, I guess he's saying, for him, it's just impossible. It's just unsustainable, this contradiction, and so again, I just wonder if other people, whatever the consequences politically, I wonder. I suppose I'm just thinking out loud here, but I suppose in the long run, if a lot of bishops started becoming, and even individual priests, because by the way, years ago I talked to a priest in New Hampshire. He was a priest in New Hampshire, and during the primaries there in 2004, they told him that John Kerry was going to come to mass, and he said, "Okay, but I won't give him communion." And they said, "That's all right." And then he didn't present himself for communion, and they actually had a nice conversation afterwards. He said it was very amicable, the whole ththing. They avoided any kind of a scene, obviously. But so that was an individual priest making the call. So it's not just bishops, right? But so if I could, maybe you could foresee a situation where bishops and priests become more rigorous about this, and maybe you would have fewer pro-choice politicians saying, "Well, I'm a Catholic and that's fine," and maybe it would kind of force a kind of shakeout. I don't know. I just think there's so. I mean, at the moment, there are so many bishops and priests who wouldn't do that you could always find a way to.
Right.
That I think.
No, I think you're right about that, and and again, I think that the average American voter and the average Catholic voter is probably animated by other things when it comes to the ballot box anyway. I mean, certainly there are those who are primarily animated by abortion. They're on both sides of the aisle, though. Yeah. And for most voters, they're going to vote pocketbook first. And that's what we're seeing. It's what we see cycle after cycle. I mean, James Carville said it in 1992. It's the economy, stupid. And so I tend to take Cordileone at his word because I don't think he's looking to depose Nancy Pelosi from her seat in Congress. But I do think that a lot of these bishops get questioned about how Nancy Pelosi, especially maybe Pelosi, again, because of the specific argument that she makes, but other Catholic politicians are supporting abortion. They probably have to deal with that question an awful lot, and he probably just got tired of it, and decided, that's too glib. He's been working on the issue for years. He's been trying to reach out to her. She's apparently stopped taking his calls. And apparently he felt that there was another step necessary. Whether it actually leads to any long-lasting change, is certainly an open question. I know it's intended, at least ostensibly, to get Pelosi to change, to get her to recognize that she's out of step with the Catholic teachings, to repent and to atone. But I think that the likelihood of that is probably slim. We all have hope, but so I don't think the politics are really going to change, Frank. I mean, that's sort of, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking again, I was talking to somebody who covers Biden in the White House and who said, and maybe this is obvious, but it wasn't really obvious to me, but he really, 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 really hates this. He really, really hates this issue. He hates being asked about it. He hates it when the bishops say that he shouldn't take communion and so forth. I don't know about Nancy Pelosi, but I imagine she really doesn't like it either. To the extent that you adopt, let's assume she's entirely sincere, all the more so. I mean, if being a Catholic is part of her identity, well, it's one thing if, people are arguing and so forth. But if your bishop says you can't take communion, even though you can easily find priests who will tell you, oh, no, don't be silly, that's fine. That is, I don't know if we should dismiss how much that might prey on her mind, in the sense that if only because it tarnishes that aspect of her persona. I mean, again, I'm not suggesting he's insincere. I'm just saying, so if you're Joe Biden, part of the way you present yourself is that I'm a Catholic and that's part of my identity. Okay, fine. So it's harder to do that if your own bishop is saying you are not worthy of receiving the sacrament. It's a lot harder to do that. Or to put it in another way, somebody was saying, somebody was saying, I think the bishops did in a sense succeed last year in making this an issue that doesn't go away, in the sense that if you think Biden Catholic, it kind of immediately entails for many people, I think, whereas it didn't before, oh yeah, but there's that abortion problem. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's not an unproblematic Catholic identity. Like, so Jimmy Carter's an evangelical Christian. That's just part of his image. Okay, that's it. But with Biden, he's a Catholic, and then there's that asterisk now in many minds. Maybe they succeeded in doing that. So again, we're falling back into politics again. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, that's great. I mean, it's what we're talking about. And of course, you're covering the Vatican. There's politics involved there. What's coming up next for you at the Wall Street Journal and in your Vatican reporting?
Well, there's a lot going on. There's a trial that's going on, of course, we don't know when it's going to end. It's finally, there were for months where it was, there were just procedural moves and attempts to, have the trial thrown out and so forth. And now they're actually getting into testimony. So that's colorful. So it's very confusing. The Pope, despite his great difficulty walking, or at least standing up, is planning to take two big trips soon. In early July to Africa, to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and to South Sudan, and in late July to Canada, which will be a very dramatic trip, I think, especially, as I say, because if he's in great physical discomfort or pain, and so those are some of the things that are happening.
And are you going to go on the Canada trip by any chance?
I hope so. I think that would be an interesting trip to go on. Yes.
I think it'd be an interesting trip because he's just issued an apology for, the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. This is a big, huge issue right now in Canada. And I think that that's going to make it a very compelling story to follow when he comes to Canada. I think people in the U.S. maybe aren't quite as aware of it as they should be. But, obviously if he's coming to Canada, he's going to be shedding light on that as a function of that, the apology for that. And I think that that's a story that's going to get more traction when he does do that.
Oh, absolutely. I think first of all, that is the reason he's going, which makes this trip unique, I think. It is the reason it makes this trip unique, because he's not going for other reasons. He's going for that reason. Which is something. And also, there's a U.S. dimension to this, that last year, after they discovered some parent mass graves at one of the sites of these schools that were run indigenous people, indigenous young people. After this discovery was made, the Department of the Interior in the U.S. Started a study of similar schools in the U.S., many of which were run by the Catholic Church. So yeah, this is a potentially big deal, not only for Canada but also for the United States.
Well, that's one reason among many, by the way, that you should be following Frank on Twitter at Francis X Rocca, Rocca, on Twitter. And online.wsj.com is the website, obviously, for the Wall Street Journal, which everybody should know by this point in time. So keep an eye there. Keep an eye on Frank's excellent reporting from the Vatican. And again, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks a lot. See you later.
All right. Stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up right next. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. I am really pleased to introduce Pete Peterson, who's the Dean of Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy. He's a good friend and colleague of Bruce Herschensohn, one of my political heroes, and here to discuss that, as well as Bruce Herschensohn's final book, A Profile of Hong Kong During Times Past, Times Current, and Its Quest of a Future Maintaining Hong Kong's Liberty, a book which is just out and you can get right now, Bruce Herschensohn's final book. Pete, so good to have you with us. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy man and you're jumping in the middle of doing some other things here.
Well, thanks so much. I'm so glad that we get to talk about our friend in common, Bruce Herschensohn.
I would hope that I could be described as such. I had a remarkable interview with the man, and we corresponded a little bit just before and after that. And I grew up watching Bruce Herschensohn on television, in Los Angeles, and he had these great debates on ABC, the local ABC affiliate, with John Tunney, former Senator John Tunney,
sure,
with whom he was friends for decades.
That's right.
And I mean, first off, I liked his politics. Obviously, I probably disagreed mostly with what John Tunney had to say, but I was always struck by the cordiality, the courtliness of both men. I mean, it was really remarkable, really hearkening back to when politics and debate were a lot more honorable than they turned out to be. And but still an inspiration. Bruce Herschensohn was an inspiration. Let me tell you something. One of the greatest things of this job, and one of its scariest, is when you get a chance to interview somebody who was one of your idols, and you cross your fingers, and you're not going to embarrass yourself, or worse yet, find out that you were completely wrong about the person.
That's right. Bruce was one of those people. I first met Bruce probably back in 2005 when I went to the graduate school at Pepperdine. And as somebody who had come out to Pepperdine from the Northeast, I frankly didn't know a lot about Bruce Herschensohn. I didn't know this history. All I knew him was one who was extremely well versed in international relations and national security issues. But as I got to know him over the years, and then when I became dean, we had him back to speak a number of times on campus at the graduate school. He's a mensch. He was brilliant. He was so kind to our students, not only as a beloved professor, but as a mentor for students well into their careers. He was a relationship builder who helped our students well into their careers after graduating from the school. So really a what you see is what you got kind of person.
A true gentleman, really, honestly, in every sense of the word, a true gentleman.
Yeah, no, that's right. And as you say, his ability to engage with others on the other side of the political aisle. He had a very successful run here in LA media. But at the same time, he set an example for what could be possible with building friendships across the aisle, but at the same time, holding true to your principles. He never wavered on his commitment to liberty and challenging bad policy. But at the same time, he never made it personal. He always looked to build relationships.
I honestly think that this was a life that really needs more attention. I know we're going to talk about his book, right? Because I mean, he was really always about the issues. He was really always about policy. I don't think that he was that into electoral politics. And I know that, just from talking with him in the brief period of time I had, that the, identity and identities, not the right word, but sort of the tribalism, I guess, of politics didn't really interest him. He was interested in policy. And I think in a way that means that he is not going to necessarily get his full due as to his impact, as to what we should learn from the remarkable life of Bruce Herschensohn.
I think that's true, although I think his last book, and I think the particular thing that he was always committed to and a true partisan was on issues of liberty and freedom. I mean, he was a true freedom fighter.
Right.
To see him in the classroom on the issues that he engaged in professionally, he was somebody that, you're right, he was not involved really, or not interested so much in tribal politics, but he was deeply involved in promoting and defending American exceptionalism and the ideas that ideas have consequences and the importance of freedom and liberty. And whenever he saw that under threat, he would be your worst enemy. And again, obviously, for this book that we're talking about, his last book, which was one of several he wrote in the same subject matter, I think he's actually going to be not redeemed from this, but new attention will be paid because he's proving himself to be quite prophetic in the issues, the global issues, and the threats to liberty and freedom that are coming from certain parts of the globe.
Right. It's important to remember that all of this was written before the invasion of Ukraine, for instance, and how that's definitely going to tip against Taiwan, which comes up in this book. Before we get to that, though, I mean, we should mention too, and just if you're not watching on video, if you're listening to this on a download, I'm speaking with Pete Peterson, Dean of Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy, and Pete actually organized Bruce Herschensohn's final public appearance, which was a roundtable discussion on this topic, China and Hong Kong. Tell us a little bit about that event and about what the how that discussion unfolded.
I'm so glad you asked that question about his last trip to campus. It was about this set of issues. Certainly one of many times he's spoken on China on our campus, but the last one was specifically about Hong Kong. And at the time, Hong Kong was being seen as increasingly under threat from mainland China. Obviously, we now live in the wake of the decisions and the attacks that have come from mainland China into Hong Kong and essentially the subjugation of a once free region. But what is so powerful about Bruce, and certainly a fit for our graduate program, is he knows the history so well. And he doesn't just know the history, he knows chapter and verse of international agreements that he can cite to show that that China was essentially going back on agreements that they signed, in this case with the UK, on the status of Great Britain. And what was so interesting about that particular conversation is we do have graduate students from China. And so in this case, there were graduate students who for the first time had been told, were being told the truth, but had been taught that Hong Kong was always going to be a possession of China, that agreement with the UK was really conditional, and that the UK had broken those conditions of that agreement. And Bruce just went through chapter and verse, but again, not confrontationally, just very calmly and securely telling the true history of the China-Hong Kong relationship. And it was an utterly eye-opening experience for these Chinese students.
You know, Pete, I got to tell you, the book itself is an utterly eye-opening experience for me, because this is not a subject matter on which I'm terribly well versed, especially in terms of the history of Hong Kong and certainly the present. I would say that I've been aware and following the story since the treaty that was originally going to turn back over to China in 1997, what the terms of that agreement were and all that. That I pretty much knew about. But I honestly did not realize that Hong Kong was a relatively new invention. It really didn't. It wasn't really even an entity until the British built it, which I actually was not aware of. I thought it was a relic of British colonialism, which, I mean, you can make an argument that that's the case, but I was not aware that basically the British built Hong Kong until I read the first chapter of A Profile of Hong Kong by Bruce Herschensohn.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. And again, that history, and I think you put that exactly right, Ed, that, you know, it could be seen as part of British colonial history, but it was such a hands-off relationship in so many ways that it really was created to be an outpost of freedom and free markets. That while there certainly were benefits for the UK in its creation, it was really seen as being the creating of its own self-governing entity.
Right. And I have to tell you, I you know, one of the things that you find out about this, of course, is that Bruce was working on this book when he passed away. And I think that the editors made the correct call here, which was to basically, with the exception of just some copy editing, to leave it in the form that he last had it in and publish it that way. And I got to tell you, I don't read too many history books where I actually laugh out loud at some passages, and I did with this one when he was discussing how everybody was terribly unhappy, both British and both Great Britain at the time and China were terribly unhappy with their negotiators, and one of them ended up here in Texas. The British negotiator ended up here in Texas, which, you know, I actually think it was a promotion, but clearly it wasn't intended that way.
Well, but again, that's Bruce, right? That's who Bruce was in person. That you could not, and I remember that last presentation that he made. You know, he wasn't getting around that well, but his mind was just so dead on, and that velvet tone. I mean, he was kind of like, you know, Mel Torme was the velvet tone.
Yes,
he was kind of like he was very similar, kind of just so smooth in his talking and delivery, but also at the same time just such a dry sense of humor and the ability to deliver very hard truths, but in a way, both in the tenor of his voice, but also just in the way that he framed things. I mean, he was such an amazing intellect and way that he framed very difficult and in some cases complex discussions to boil them down to its essence. That's what he's done in the book, for sure, and that's what he did in person.
And Pete Peterson, I think you have landed on the most accurate description, at least in terms of what my perspective is of your friend Bruce Herschensohn. He is the Mel Torme of politics and history, and I think he would really have appreciated that.
Oh, I think it would have too. At least I hope so. Yeah, very much.
Now, there's lots of great nuggets in this. I just want to touch on one more before we get to the Taiwan thing. And I know I'm mindful of your time here because I know you're in the middle of things. But there's a great passage in here of which I was completely unaware, which was what happened in Hong Kong at the end of World War II. And I mean, when I mean the end, I mean literally the last days of World War II, and how it was a series of fortuitous events that started actually before the fall of Hong Kong in the first place that allowed the United Kingdom to hold on to it. That is a stirring story, and I'm sort of a history buff, and I've read a lot about World War II in both theaters, Pacific and European. I've never heard that story before, and he tells it so well.
He does, and again, it shows. And there were several stories like this around the globe at the conclusion of World War II, where you see nations that really could have gone one way or the other. Some went under the Iron Curtain, and others, like Hong Kong, because of the UK's both ingenuity and, frankly, passion for wanting to defend a piece of real estate in that part of the world, defended and protected Hong Kong to keep it separate. And so that really is so important, especially as it relates to today's discussions and debates. Ed, I don't know. I mean, I travel in a few policy circles. It seems like the overtaking of Hong Kong by China, aside from the protests, is like we've lost track of that story.
Right.
And really what we're seeing is those conditions that were set by the UK, the agreements that were set at the conclusion of World War II, have really been completely walked back, which is, I think, indicative of many ways of who China is and how they operate, but really do need to be revisited for anyone who cares about the future of freedom and liberty.
Well, and I think when you're reading a profile of Hong Kong here by Bruce Herschensohn, and I like to mention title and author a lot because we want to promote the book, and it is not a tough read, folks. This is a fairly quick and extremely entertaining read. But I think when you see this, what you're also seeing, it certainly is who China is, and Bruce had very no illusions about who China was starting in 1949. Right. And you get that out of the book. But I think it's also indicative of who we've become. And it's the type of thing that Bruce was pushing back against for, 50 years. I mean, this is, it's sort of this idea that sort of a moral relativist position, that we saw this in vis-a-vis the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s from the left. Yes. We're seeing it now with China, right? The same thing.
Absolutely. And I know what Bruce would say is that it's actually worse now, given the longstanding economic relationships that we have engaged ourselves with China. I think it's fair to say that the understanding of the Soviet Union as an enemy state was one that was long held and understood, but we didn't really have any direct other engagements with the Soviet Union. China is a place that in some ways belied the often uttered phrase by some that by engaging with them economically, they would the freedom would generally ensue politically. And of course, that has not happened. And so I know that especially his passion around Taiwan and Hong Kong was in many ways a reflection on his great concern for China and the fact that he really believed till his last day that America was just not taking China seriously enough.
Well, that brings us to the end of the book, and I don't want to necessarily give away the plot points here because I want people to buy the book. Again, a profile of Hong Kong by Bruce Herschensohn. You definitely want to be purchasing that. But Taiwan now is I think more in the focus of American policymakers and Americans in general. I think because of what's going on in Ukraine, because I think we have been woken up from a sort of 30-year stupor about about end of history and all the rest of this nonsense.
That's right.
And clearly Vladimir Putin is a reckless Russian imperialist who is determined to expand the Russian Empire by force. And that leads us right back to China and Taiwan, where we have made a lot of security guarantees. And I think we're also sending a lot of signals. And this is not necessarily just from one party. We're sending a lot of signals that maybe we're not going to take that very seriously. What's at risk in Taiwan, and how at risk is Taiwan at this particular moment in time?
Well, certainly what Bruce thought, and I think what's fair to say is true today that others have said, is that it's very much what Neil Ferguson calls Cold War II. We either understand our relationship vis-a-vis China in that context, or we continue to walk down this road where we believe at some point China is suddenly going to turn around. And again, what was important for Bruce in telling the Hong Kong story was also to tell the China story, which is to say, this is who you're dealing with. This is how they consider freedom. This is how they think about free markets. They will squash them wherever present. And so Taiwan just becomes kind of the, if you will, and this probably is, not the right historical equivalence or reference, but it's kind of like a domino theory that's happening in the South Pacific. Yep. My father lives in Australia, and in the northern part of Australia on the coast, and he's been telling me for years what China has been doing, working its way through New Guinea and Fiji and the South Pacific. This whole Belt and Road Initiative, which is essentially an investment program that the Chinese have engaged in order to buy favor, and then take power in places throughout the world. That is certainly the case with with Taiwan, and of a stake where Taiwan knows our engagement with China, or Taiwan knows our China knows our engagement with Taiwan, and sees that as a way of testing how much we can be trusted as an ally, even if there is no formal military agreement. This, what's been called strategic ambiguity, has obviously come apart in the Ukraine, and one wonders now if it's going to be tested now in Taiwan.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Belt and Road Initiative, because I think that this is something that Americans it's really flown under the radar. And I mean, this is part of, and there's all sorts of different threads that you can unravel with this. You know, this week, the NBC News went back and revisited the Hunter Biden laptop story. And one of his big partners in China was a guy who was known as the Belt and Road billionaire, Yi Jianming. And this is a guy who was very tied into the Belt and Road Initiative, very tied into the Xi Jinping regime. And so you've already got these connections into American politics. But for instance, you're talking about the Pacific Rim and that sort of thing. I think it was a couple of months ago that the Solomon Islands, was it the Solomon Islands?
That's right. Solomon Islands went,
I mean, that's striking. I mean, we fought, bled, and died for the Solomon Islands. You know,
I know, but, and even so, I mean, it was my dad who told me 2 years ago. He said, "Pete, you know, China is building a deep water port in Jamaica," and I said, "No, that's not true. We would have been told by our mainstream media if they were building a deep water port there." Well, sure enough, I had to look it up, and through Australian news sources, I found China, as part of this Belt and Road Initiative, is indeed attempting to build a deep water port in Jamaica that will also take their massive new aircraft carriers. So, I mean, we had a whole Cuban Missile Crisis over a part of the world, but here's China coming in under the guise of One Belt, One Road, and is engaging in a lot of different parts of the world that frankly, we, as you say, Ed, we are just not fully understanding. But the goals are always in one direction: to establish power bases, and oftentimes to take control or at least influence in governments, and then to use them as possible military bases. It needs to be deeply concerning to all Americans, and I know was to Bruce.
And again, his final book, A Profile of Hong Kong by Bruce Herschensohn, is available right now. And what you get when you're looking at this is, of course, you get a profile of Hong Kong, and there's a lot of great information about Hong Kong. But what you're really getting is a reflection of China in this, and the risks that China presents to us, to the free world, and sort of a wake up call. And it's sort of Bruce Herschensohn's valediction, if you will, is to watch China. And this book gives you lots of reasons to do that. Pete Peterson, I know we're going to have to let you go here in just a minute, but I want to beg you for just one more indulgence. If you could give us just some quick anecdote about Bruce Herschensohn that you think just would either, if nothing else, entertain us, but maybe shed a little light into how you saw Bruce.
So maybe again, out of the files of what you see is what you get with Bruce. My last time seeing him at his apartment, and he kept an apartment in Hollywood, was a couple years before he died, and went to visit him there. And we were talking about maybe going out to eat, going to a restaurant. He goes, no, I've already taken care of the lunch preparations. Well, sure enough, within about 15 minutes, 3 Domino's pizzas show up. And we're sitting there, just in his living room with these 3 Domino's pizzas. And you just stare at the walls, which were his apartment was a museum. And thankfully, Pepperdine, because of our relationship with Bruce, we are the keeper of his papers. So we are essentially the archives of all his papers. So if this goes out to anyone, and I agree with you, Ed, if somebody wanted to write the biography or the history of Bruce Herschensohn, please reach out to me, because we are the keeper of his papers. It was just, an amazing conversation, but just held over the simplest of foods. But that's who Bruce was. I mean, he just was a very a simple but elegant person. I mean, we were still meeting with him in a very kind of casual meeting over pizza, but he had a jacket, a tie with cufflinks on. He was an avid cufflink collector. And again, just incredible. I'll just say the second story because it just popped into my head. One of the last presentations he gave was on the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, and he had done an amazing documentary of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, this was somebody who served in White Houses of both parties. Back to your point about not really caring about the tribalism, and he did a documentary on that and showed that documentary, and finished in talking about the movie itself and what it was based on, and broken up into tears just about his respect and love for President Kennedy. But again, it was somebody he was just fierce. At the same time, he was fiercely loyal to Richard Nixon, and some of the things that went down at the Nixon Library about 5 or 6 years ago, he just was adamant about just calling that out and just saying, you're not respecting President Nixon in the way you should be respected. So just a fiercely loyal to friends, but also just a very elegant intellectual, and again, a great friend.
Well, Pete Peterson, I want to thank you for sharing some of your experiences with Bruce Herschensohn. And like I said at the beginning, sometimes you're a little worried about whether or not your idol has feet of clay or whatever. Never the case with Bruce Herschensohn. What a fine gentleman. I think we're going to miss him more and more and more as time goes on, because he was a rare breed indeed. Don't forget to buy the book, A Profile of Hong Kong by Bruce Herschensohn. And Pete, where can people find you? I mean, do you have any links that you can throw out so people can find you at Pepperdine?
Sure. I'm at Pepperdine, and the website there is publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu, and you can find my profile and some of the work we're doing in Malibu there.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty prosaic, right? Publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. And I mean, it's straightforward, and I think that reflects well on you and on Pepperdine. And I really want to thank you for a fantastic conversation today.
Thanks so much, Ed. Really appreciate it.
Stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show coming up right after this. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. Special counsel John Durham's prosecution of former Hillary Clinton campaign attorney Michael Sussmann has uncovered how her 2016 presidential campaign shopped around an unfounded allegation as fact and turned it into the worst dirty trick since Watergate. Witnesses testified that Sussmann shopped the false allegation of a link between the Trump Organization and Russia-controlled Alpha Bank to the CIA and the FBI. In both cases, Sussmann falsely claimed not to be working for a political candidate. Clinton campaign manager Robbie Mook testified that Hillary herself approved the decision to leak the allegation to the media. The Washington Post and the New York Times won Pulitzers for their breathless reporting on the Russia collusion fallacy. Neither paper has gone out of their way to report on its unraveling. This dirty trick has torn our country apart and set off a wave of political hysteria not seen since the Red Scare. Accountability should come to those at the highest levels of both politics and the media. I'm Ed Morrissey.